Welcome to the PetroPapers podcast. Say that 10 times fast. This is where you get your oil and gas intellectual stimulation by asking the technical questions. I'm Yoga Pradhan, and with me here today, I have Bryan McDowell from Sabata Energy Consultants. Usually, I typically talk about a paper and I introduce the author and pepper them with questions. But we have a technical leadership special today, and I'm going to have Bryan talk a little bit about himself and introduce himself as I ask him the questions that will spark some oil and gas intellectual stimulation. So welcome to the podcast, Bryan.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, Bryan, I thought just having you on the podcast and just knowing you for quite some time, you've had a very interesting career path. And I wanted to know, so we can share with our viewers and listeners, if you can talk about your career path.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a winding path, to say the least. So started out, did my undergrad in geology at Texas A&M, graduate in December 2010. Went to grad school at School of Mines. Initially started out as a master's in geology, then had some funding issues essentially when I went there. I was like, you know what? Like, my backup plan is, I was always like, well, if that didn't work out, I always just go get a master's of petroleum engineering. So what I ended up doing is I actually started my classes of petroleum. My funding came through about a semester later, so I ended up doing dual masters for a while between petroleum engineering and geology, and then finally finished out my petroleum engineering degree, converted my geology master's to a PhD, which I am still finishing right now. So I've been telling people I'm 3 to 4 months from finishing my PhD for, I think, about 4 years now. So yeah, it's been a minute. So, but looks like we're finally going to have to knock this thing out this fall. Yeah, and then so I was in grad school for a long time, but I worked pretty much the entire time I was there. So my career's been kind of weird in that regard. So worked for 7 months for QEP up in Oklahoma City when they still had that office as a interning as a geologist, who then was Bob Thornburg, who was the chief geologist then. Came up to Mines, worked at QEP in Denver for a little bit while I was at Mines downtown working the Bakken. This is back in, when was this? 2000, late 2011, early 2012. Did a summer at XTO after that, work in the Merrimack play. Let's see, that would have been 2012. And then you and I interned together, was it 2013 or 2014? 2013. Oh, sorry.
2014.
2014. Okay. All right. Yeah. So I did geology internship with Devin 2013, did my first engineering internship 2014 at Devin with you. So I think I was working Granite Wash the first summers at Devin. Second summer I was doing RTA up in the Powder River Basin. Worked at Cimarex for about almost 2 years after that. New Ventures, working part-time in Denver. Did a little bit of stuff in the Stack, Merrimack after that, and then Discovery Natural Resources up until Sabata. So there I started as an intern, and then left the company as a technical advisor. So doing a little bit of geology and engineering. Actually, by that point I was mostly engineering, so I've pretty much transitioned totally into engineering over the course of 10 years. And then now when I started Sabata, now I do mostly geology. So it's kind of funny how it goes.
It is. Well, I do want to dig into this a little bit, but why did you start Sabata?
Honestly, is during COVID and didn't have anything else to do. So I get bored really easily. It's like, you know what? I'm not going to sit at the house I kind of figured this is going to last a year, to be honest, like just kind of from what I read about other kind of pandemics and stuff. So yeah, so honestly, it's like I was still teaching a little bit of spot fire classes at the time, just here and there. And then I was when I was at Discovery, I was working at Frac Kids, which was honestly some of the coolest stuff that I'd done, and wanted to keep doing that. So I started consulting for Frac Pro AI, and was getting enough billable hours. I used to run my stuff through a separate LLC called LVC Land Company, which is mainly just for real estate stuff. And anyways, like, well, we get enough in here, I actually need to start my own a separate LLC that's focused towards this. And yeah, that's kind of how it started. So to be honest, I've named all my LLCs after spaghetti Western actors and stuff. So that's where Sabata came from. I'm half Mexican, so I wanted something to sound a little bit Spanish. So it's a terrible trilogy from, I think, the late 60s or something. So yeah, I really like the name. give everyone a piece of advice: never name a company after a movie, because it's very, very hard to get the URLs. So that's why we're Sabata.us rather than Sabata.com. So,
That's fair.
but
And
yeah.
that's pretty legitimate in terms of, that's a good piece of advice that you talked about. You talked about this a little bit. I know you consulted with Frac Pro AI, and then you've also talked about teaching some spot fire classes. And I've been familiar with some of the Python classes that you've taught when working for Sabata. But what are some of the projects y'all are up to?
So the big one right now, so yeah, we teach quite a bit, spot fire, and just started doing Python stuff this year, to be honest, teaching wise. Um, we do that mostly. One, it's good to get out there. I mean, we make a little bit of money off of it, obviously, but a lot of it is just kind of get out there and meet people. To be honest, we're still a young company, and short courses are the greatest way. In my personal opinion, is the best way to meet people, especially potential clients, because it's essentially a 16-hour interview. To be honest, right? And so you kind of get a feel of what someone knows and doesn't know, and all that good stuff. So we kind of do that to pay the bills, while we're doing the real big project, which is our geologic data directory, which is kind of a bigger thing in itself. So what we did is, back in December of 20, me and my buddy Ron Bianco, who's at Fasken, he's a silent partner in Sabata now. We actually pulled some money together and actually bought one of the oil and gas libraries here in Midland. So there's 3 libraries originally, or well, there's been 3 for a long time. There was a couple others, I believe, but the main one is the Subsurface Library, which is a for-profit library down by the Concho office downtown Midland. The Midland Energy Library, which is a really great collection. We work with them quite a bit. And this other one's the Petroleum Research Center. So we bought the Petroleum Research Center. It was 500,000 paper logs and 1,000,000 completion cards. So just shy of 2 million paper documents. Now, when we went through this, well, this is a lot of really great data, but it wasn't organized very well. And so what I did is I actually took my doctorate out of mines, which was actually cataloging all the publications have been done out in Western Colorado in the Upper Cretaceous. And we essentially took another little company that I had co-founded with a couple buddies up in at the Rockies for helium, took their well spots, took this paper data, and started putting it all together. So what this has kind of morphed into over time is that we're building what we call the geologic data directory. I got to come up with a catchy name for it, which we haven't done yet. So if you think of something snazzy, let me know. But it's really, to be honest, it's really like the Google search for oil and gas data, for exploration data specifically. So unlike like IHS or Enverus or TGS, you go through and research their database. The only thing that you're going to find is stuff they own. It's essentially a single vendor search, right? We're on the complete opposite end. So we are grabbing anything and everything from everybody that we can and put it on one spot. So right now we've got a free dashboard out there. It's just sabata.us/directory. We're actually releasing now the premium version, which are actually the tables you can download. And just think of it as like a yellow, almost like a yellow pages. So you can go through by county, by land grid on a state by state basis and see what's available. And then from that product, that's where kind of all the really cool, fun stuff starts branching off. We do sell data, we broker data. Through right now, we're actually kind of in the early stages of brokerage with the Midland Energy Library and the Denver Earth Resources Library, as well as a couple other places. And then, yeah, we're also now we're actually about to start getting into, we're start making maps and tops and all that stuff, so we can actually start selling those as products here. Looks like later this year, early next year. So yeah, it's kind of a mishmash on to be honest. It sounds like a lot of ways, but we really try to treat this as like a one-stop shop. So if you need data, if you need just some kind of low cost, high quality consulting, kind of quick hits, stuff like that, we're out here in Midland, we're shaking hands and kissing babies and all that good stuff. So, and at the end of the day, if we can't do it, we try to be the people that can help you find somebody who can. So if we can't do it, we'll pass you on to somebody that can, or we'll find somebody for you. So.
Well, I do want to congratulate you on starting your company and everything, because not a lot of people tend to make that jump, or people are really scared to make that jump anyway. So that's really
Yeah.
cool.
I should have been more scared to make the jump, to be honest. It's good. I'm glad we did it, but man, it is quite the experience. So I have learned a lot in the last 2.5 years, and I still feel like I don't know anything at all, to be honest. So it's been
I
good.
feel, I feel like no matter how many years of experience you have, there's always those questions. You come up with more questions and you realize you just don't know as much as you think you should, or you think you're supposed to know. So
Yeah, the thing to me too, this has all been it's been different a couple different ways. Number one, I mean, I had like a little real estate LLC, so I've done some business stuff before, but this is a whole nother ordeal. I mean, because we're really talking like intellectual property, so starting a company and actually having a payroll. I've got four no yeah, 5 people that work for us right now. So I have one full-time guy, a couple part-time folks, and some student workers that work for us. But yeah, I was like, coming out of an operator, there's 2 things. Coming from an operator to the services side is a whole nother jump too. Because I've always been on operating side. I've always usually been in exploration or something close to exploration, not quite development roles. Actually, I guess my last roles were development. But that was a big jump. And then the other thing too is like, my previous roles, I was a technical advisor. I just did really hardcore technical stuff all day, every day. And going from that to, running payroll and sending invoices and making the sales calls and all that stuff, it's just a totally, totally different mixture of day-to-day tasks, which it's been good. I do miss that I don't spend more time on the technical work, which is what I'm trying to get back to now. But yeah, it's been a good experience in more ways than one. So
I bet. You mentioned that you've done quite a few projects, and I was curious to know what have been your favorites to date.
I think probably the favorite one I did was, to be honest, the last probably year and a half when I was with Discovery Natural Resources. So Discovery is based out of Denver. They operate about half of the Rocker Beat Ranch down in Reagan County, which is a huge ranch. I think it's like something like 175,000 acres. I think it's pretty much one fence. So you'd go from our office, which was at the gate, the main gate of the ranch, to our drilling rigs is like 30 miles on the same ranch. It's pretty wild. But when I was there, I'd come in from Cimarex, and at the time, they were doing kind of traditional kind of reservoir engineering and stuff like that, right? So my old boss, Martin Verhove, he was head of new ventures. He left from Cimarex and went to Discovery. When I left Cimarex, I followed over there and just kept working part time. And we slowly but surely started bringing in kind of rate trends analysis. My boss at the time was Alan Yolen, who actually helps us out now with Sabata, actually. And he honestly gave me a ton of freedom to just test a lot of new ideas. So went and started doing some rate transient stuff. Is really up dip, and it's really, I mean, like super black oil, relatively low pressures, reservoir pressure. So, it's really hard to get a whole lot out of the RTA, to be honest. So we started kind of fiddling around doing some reservoir simulation. And then what really kind of flipped the switch is we did a pilot on doing some kind of frac kit stuff. And the company we hired, you know, there just seemed like there was a lot of data getting left on the table. They were going and doing some analysis, but there was essentially all this pressure data that wasn't getting used. And so really the last year, I spent all of my time coming up with a system on how to do frac kit um, monitoring. So we'd go and me and Alan were very insistent that we put bottom hole gauges on all horizontal wells, which I cannot. I mean, you've heard me rant and rave about bottom hole gauges. I mean, that is the ultimate. That is the best data bang for the buck you will ever get, especially in unconventionals. In so many ways. I mean, we use it for the rate trends analysis. We use it for the reservoir simulation. We would use it for the brackets. And so we'd go through essentially every single frac job that we had going on. I had a system where we'd sequentially shut in offset wells. So we'd shut in 1 or 2 wells a day over the course of like 3 or 4 days. And we get essentially a shut-in test for interference test for all the parent wells before the frac job, gauge everything up during the frac job. So we get all of the frac hits. Then afterwards, we'd open them up 1 or 2 a day again, kind of sequentially to kind of see how things were talking afterwards. Then just seeing those interference tests before and after frac jobs, the frac hits themselves, and then going back to our reservoir simulation. And even better is our completion engineer at the time, Brad Pottabaum, who's actually still there, did a lot of great work in Gopher and figured out some interesting ways to take the Gopher fracture outputs, essentially lay them over in a gun barrel plot with all of our frac hit stuff and just sit there and tinker. It's like, okay, when I see this PSI hit down hole or on surface, what does that mean for what my reserves are going to do or how this well is going to perform and stuff like that. And a lot of this was like had to get really creative with like well spacing calc. So it was really cool. I mean, it was a great project. I was going to publish all of it, and unfortunately, we all left the company before we actually got to push it across the line. But that's why I've been kind of sitting on these panels. But it was great too, because at the time, I know you were working on some of the stuff, but there wasn't a whole lot of us really working on it. This was like 2018.
Yeah.
I mean, we were really down in the weeds, especially for a small company. And I think at first, they thought I was a little crazy. So I actually named our database Chicken Little because they thought I felt like everybody thought I was just talking about the sky was falling. But man, it was a lot of fun. I learned so much because going back to that, like there was no blueprint at that time. I mean, even though this is only 5 years ago, there was no blueprint on what to do. And so we had to go all the way back to the fundamentals. Like when we see a pressure spike, what is this exactly? Is it a poroelastic push, or is it actually a fluid connection? There's a big debate. And I was like, whether it's one or the other, it's like, well, let's just go shut in the well and see if these wells talk. And if they talk, okay, well, then that's definitely a fluid connection between the two. Anyways, it was a lot of fun. It was very circular. That's what I really liked. You say we're constantly, every single day, we're learning something new. And the better part is by the end, about a year into it, we're starting to make predictions before wells came online. And, for the most part, we're getting pretty close. So, which is always really nice to see that work kind of come through.
It's interesting you mentioned that this was work that you were doing since 2018, and we're still having those conversations.
Yeah, I've been on more panels for Frac Kids and well interference since I left Discovery than when I was actually doing the work day to day. It's kind of funny. I mean, because that's been 2.5 years now, and we still do a little bit of stuff here and there, but I have more people ask questions about that now than rather back then. I was like, oh yeah, well, Frac Kids are Frac Kids. Like, no. There's some very subtle nuances here that are very important. There's huge. I mean, as you well know, you've published on this quite a bit too, right? I mean, there's big implications for very, very small differences in those pressure responses. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
I agree. Like I said, I was just thinking about how you've been working on this since 2018, and I just came from a meeting just talking about impacts to offset wells, and multiple meetings, as a matter of fact, that which wells should be shut in. We're starting to see fluid to fluid connection. We're starting to see fluid migration, and it's just relentless.
Yeah, my favorite thing to tell people, I mean, you know me, I've got all these like silly little sayings, but honestly, a lot of them, the reason for that is because it's silly little things people remember. And one of my favorite things to talk about, like when well spacing, everybody always wants to know what's the silver bullet, like what's the proper well spacing. And you know what? The thing is well spacing isn't a problem until it is. And once it's a problem, then it's a really big problem. It's one of those things where the downsides are not nearly, you can get closer and closer and closer. It's not that bad. But the second you get just a little too close, all hell can break loose in a lot of ways. Because once you have a connection between two wells, I mean, the pressures that we're drawing these things down, the pressure differentials downhole, especially compared to like the matrix permeability. I mean, those transients are so extreme that, I mean, it's, in my opinion, it's almost impossible. Once they've connected, it's almost impossible to separate them again, to be honest. So
That's true.
anyways.
And we've observed that as well. Speaking of our discussion on frac hits and FDIs, because people don't like to call them frac hits, and
Yeah,
it's a more
that's right.
it's a more neutral term because some of them can be positive.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, what have been some of the SP papers people ought to read, or some of the papers that you recommend? Because you guys, as you know, I'm on this podcast reading papers and interviewing authors of those papers. So I had to throw in that kind of question there.
Yeah. I think the two that come to mind first and foremost is, and I'll look up these numbers for you later. It's Stephen Jones, the reservoir engineer, right? Who has it Newfield, or actually, yeah, he's at Cimarex now, or Coterra, I guess now. That's right. I forgot about that. So, yeah, so his GOR paper back in
14
2016,
or
2015.
yeah,
Yeah,
something.
whenever that, yeah, the paper I'm talking about. One talking about the shape of the GOR, the shape of your GOR curves over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was to me. I mean, and honestly, like the study the paper is actually is actually pretty straightforward, to be honest. I mean, I'm not going to say there's not a bunch of crazy science in it, but it is a relatively straightforward paper. It's not like reading some of these, like, some of these crazy rate transient stuff that they're trying to solve, like a lot of the Calgary guys are trying to solve, right? So that was that was definitely a big one for me. I cannot tell you how many times me and like I said, Alan Young, my old boss, read that over and over and over again, and went through, and we actually got to the point we were actually started using like GOR type curves. So we're actually looking at the GOR shape and kind of assigning what the GOR shape was each one of these wells, and then trying to compare and contrast like what those fluid ratios and the production, all that stuff. So that was a big one for me. I think one of the best ideas I got out of that too was we would plot GOR as a function of cum oil. And so you kind of see as your GOR goes up, you'd see kind of your cum oil start to dive down into the axis, and how the GOR works along with that. That was really interesting, kind of a way to remove time out of it. I mean, it's almost like a poor boy. It's
Yeah.
not really a poor boy's material balance, but you know what I'm saying? It kind of is.
Yeah.
So Jones's paper, I'll look up that number afterwards. Jones's paper is a big one. And I think the other one was, and I hate that I'm forgetting this. The big, the Apache guys, when they did the big 50-page paper, it was Mike Rainbolt, and I'm forgetting the other gentleman's name.
Oh,
Out of Pat. I'm sorry.
Attica, George King.
Yes, that's it. George King. So George King's first big Frac Kids paper that fit, I mean, it was a manifesto almost, that 50-page paper. That one was really good. So the Jones GOR paper, George King's FDI paper, I've read that thing time and time and time again. And they had a follow-up paper, which was Mike Rainbolt. I think he was him, and he had a co-author on the second one, if I remember correctly.
Esco.
Yeah, there you go. And that one, that was a great follow-up paper too. It's interesting. Like, I feel like papers a lot of times are like movies, right? A lot of times people want to do part ones and part twos, and usually one's pretty good and the other one's kind of so-so. That's actually, like, at least I think, is like one of the few, I shouldn't say one of the few, but like definitely one of the times where the first and the second paper are really, really great. And I think Mike and them actually tied up a couple loose ends, maybe not loose ends, or just things that didn't really get mentioned or weren't elaborated a whole lot in George King's first paper. And then the last thing is, obviously, King went and published more of that with Ali Dineshi, who's been talking about Frac Kids from the get-go, right? Way back. Was it the Hydraulic Fracturing Journal, that first issue that they put out, where there's like 4 or 5 papers in there? That's a really good one too. It's kind of hard to get your hands on. I don't know, maybe it's available online, but early on you can only really get it in print. When they first released it, like, I actually like bought it like almost immediately after it came available, and I think that was 2017, 2018 as well. So a lot of the stuff it's kind of wild, to be honest, because there's so many, and you see a lot of these service companies out doing this stuff now, but like even 5 years ago, there was really only maybe a dozen or maybe 2 dozen people that were really going down in the weeds. And like I said, I mean, Ollie Dineshi, George King, Mike Rainbolt, I mean, to me, they were just so far ahead of everybody in publishing. There's another gentleman out of Hess, I'm forgetting his name right now.
Greg Support.
Yeah, there you go. So he's put out obviously a bunch of great stuff too. So I never read his quite as much because he was so focused on Appalachia. And then some Bakken stuff too. The Bakken's such a different reservoir in so many ways. We never really, we'd read those papers. We never studied too much because it's not always the best analog for the Wolfcamp. It's essentially just a tight conventional reservoir in a lot of ways. So anyways, yeah, so those are big ones for me.
Awesome. Well, you and I can do some digging, and we'll put those papers in the description box for our viewers and listeners. So yeah.
Yep. Perfect. Yeah, I'll find those for you.
Perfect. We've talked quite a bit about FDIs, Frac Kids. Any other hot button topics you can think of that are really popular in this industry?
Couple things. The ones that I see more and more, obviously, we've seen a lot of stuff about CCUS pop up. We actually just acquired about 9,000 foot of core from Whiting out on the Central Basin platform. We're actually trying to, I think, make a little bit of a play too, if nothing else, as like a potential analog for some other areas. So that's one more I hear more and more. The other one, I was literally just talking about this at our office happy hour last night, is the brines. I've had multiple people contact me over the last 2 or 3 months that are looking for data related to mining brines, either for lithium or for other kind of trace metals, or maybe not trace metals, but other, those, was it alkali metals, whatever you call them.
Sure.
Um, yeah, so that's one I'm seeing more and more. I know there's still quite a bit of work going out in geothermal. It seems like it's slowed up a bit to me. I don't know, maybe I'm just not paying attention as much, but CCUS seems to be going pretty strong still. I'm still seeing a lot about helium. Actually, I started working helium a while back, and I love working helium prospects. It's just so wild. I mean, it's just so different than, it's the same in different oil and gas. The areas that you work and what you're looking for are so different. I still see quite a bit of helium activity going too. There's a company out in Arizona right now that's wildcatting helium, apparently doing pretty well. I keep seeing the reports. There's another one out in Colorado, a lot going on in Saskatchewan. So I know, I'm actually looking at my little, my office. I've actually got a list of all kind of the crazy stuff that we at least keep follow a little bit. Because for us, for selling data and stuff, all these things are still, you're still going to go through the same process, right? Seeing what data is available, what data is useful, what can you do with it from there. I mean, as you well know, as an engineer, you know, um, not all pressure is created equal,
Mm.
right? Even though a leak off test versus a defit versus, bleed off after a frac job, those are all very, although they look similar, you use them very different ways. So, and then the other one obviously is Bitcoin. We actually tried to make him play in Bitcoin during COVID, and I think a lot of people thought we were crazy at the time, but it seems like now it's back and strong, and people are doing a lot. I know there's actually a meetup group here in Midland that's been talking about it too. It's actually got some really good speakers. I've only been able to go once, but the one time I went, they had some really great people. So, and I think that's gonna be another one too. I think this whole like mixture of where Bitcoin, and we're seeing more like CNG, like compressed natural gas for fracs and stuff like that. I think there's still a lot of ways that we can market gas, that we can get more creative once you start putting the Bitcoin mining into it, putting the helium into it, taking out the NGLs, all those other things. So, and then obviously kind of ties right back into CCUS stuff too, and even hydrogen storage. I think a really interesting thing that people ought to look at is like, helium is the helium's actually doesn't have enough mass to stay on the earth. So
Yeah.
every bit of helium in the air is actually escaping into space. And to me, people are looking for hydrogen storage. To me, the best place to look at this is actually old helium fields. And if it can hold literally, I mean, it's two protons and two neutrons, right? Now hydrogen's obviously smaller, but still, if you can hold helium, it's got a good chance it could hold hydrogen too. So we're kind of circling back and looking at some of that stuff too. So yeah, I think it's an exciting time. We were just talking about this. There's a lot of really interesting little specialties that are going through right now. And I think this historical data, that's why we're making this play on this historical data for these types of things. Historical data is really, I think, is going to be really valuable again. I mean, it's always been valuable, but getting a second or a third life out here, I believe. So we'll see.
Exactly. No, you brought up a lot of really good points and some things that are really allowing me to think about what kind of papers I need to get and what kind of people I need to put on this podcast. So you're just giving me lots of ideas.
Yeah,
Well, I have another question for you. I just wanted to pivot a little bit, and it's
sure.
on the fact that we both live in Midland. And Midland gets a lot of flack. You already know that. And you've probably thought about Midland. I don't know what you thought about Midland before moving over here, but I know that I got a lot of flack moving to Midland, but I made it a choice to move to Midland. So just for work. And I just know that I don't have to deal with traffic compared to a bigger city. So for you, why Midland?
Yeah, I'll be honest. It was funny is of all the, I was talking about like all the places I worked and everything. Like out of all of that, I never actually worked in Midland and never worked in Houston. And I was never avoided it. I grew up in a small town, Texas. Like I was in Denver for a long time. I was happy to be back. Um, I ended up in San Angelo when I was with Discovery because I wanted to move back to Texas, and they didn't have a Midland office, and I don't think they were too open to us opening one. So I ended up out working out of the field office, doing all that stuff. So I mean, COVID hit, and I started up Sabata. I mean, we honestly had a choice. Like, well, where do we want to put this thing? And at the time, like, there was no real choice. It's just, well, I'm just working out of my house like everybody else, right? Well, after we bought this library out here, I mean, it's pretty much set. So we kind of we actually discussed in house whether we should actually keep the library out here or actually pack it up, move into Houston or Dallas Fort Worth or something, because frankly, we could, especially since we're trying to digitize a bunch of it. So we made the call to keep it here. Again, I'd been through Midland a handful of times, or more than a handful of times for work and stuff like that. And I've got some buddies out here, but mostly just because it's like, with all of this, especially with the way politics are going and stuff too, like a lot of the Rockies is going to get real tough to start doing stuff because all the state and the federal lands and, and frankly, just the politics too. People just don't really want or need that money as much as they used to. I was like, well, the Permian's a Permian, and that's not going to change anytime soon. And frankly, if anything, federal lands get shut down, Texas is just going to crank more and more. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. It sounds silly, but a joke that Biden was the greatest thing to happen to the Permian Basin in a lot of ways, to be honest, because it shoved so much money. The Rockies essentially got not shut down, but definitely slowed it up. And a lot of that money came down here. I mean, we've seen two different companies from Denver get merged in or bought into Midland companies, right, in just the last year or so. So, I mean, even Cimarex is moving down to Houston, which honestly, I never thought that would have happened.
Yeah.
So, I like Midland, to be honest. I mean, there's not a whole lot of nightlife here. I mean, it's definitely a lot different than when I was living downtown Denver or even going to Houston or something like that. But it's a big town, but it's still a small town, to be honest. And everybody knows everybody's like, I've been here a year and a half, and I feel like I know a good chunk of the people in town. Obviously, there's a lot of people I still don't know, but and everyone's out here. I don't know. I think Midland is the purest form of capitalism that there is, because everybody out here, you're not really moving here for lifestyle. I mean, let's just get that out of the way, right?
Yeah.
And people are out here trying to do something, right? Make some money, move up in the world, whatever. Everybody's out here hustling. And I really, really like that. As one thing is, and live in some of the other cities or up in the Rockies that, a lot of it's about lifestyle, which is fine. It's just not really my style of doing things. In Midland, everybody's out here trying to get the job done and trying to get to the next thing, the next big thing, whatever that is. And I really like it. I love working in that sort of environment, very, kind of type A, fast paced, type of deal. And it's great, honestly. I don't really see, I'll get out of town on the weekends and stuff like that, like everybody else. But I'm honestly like, I don't really see myself moving from here anytime soon, to be honest. It's a great place to own a business, I think.
Neither do I. I don't see myself moving outside of Midland anytime soon either. And there's just so much work to be done in this area. Like,
I agree. I mean, and the thing about people don't realize is that if you don't live here, a lot of this is like mutual commiseration on some stuff, right? I mean, like living here really is a bit of a club in a lot of ways, but you don't really have to be here for 10 years. I mean, obviously some of those clubs, you definitely have to be here for a long time, but um, there's so much, people don't realize how much activity and just these kind of one-off conversations that just happen at the bar over lunch or at one of the SP happy hours or something like that, right? I mean, the amount of intel, I'm going to call it intel because frankly, if business as it is a lot, the amount of intel that you can get just by talking with somebody, and people helping other people out that are here in the basin, it's hard to beat, and some of the shops I worked for, they didn't have offices down here. I was like, you have no idea how much you're missing by not having even a small office here, to be honest, because there's so much going on underneath the surface. People are a little bit, you don't get nearly as, I feel like people are a little bit more tight hole about stuff out here too. They kind of keep it in town at least. So, and then the fact is like the whole oil industry is not just horizontals, right? I mean, there is still a very vibrant conventional oil field, oil exploration going out here. I got a buddy in San Angelo that's wildcatting wells right now. I mean, like straight wildcats. I mean, it's still one of the most drilled basins in the world, right? But this stuff is all over the place. I mean, going in, I mean, you've seen this too, like even since this spring, rig count's gone up for sure, but there's a lot of traffic in town. And I think a lot of that is actually people going into these old verticals. Like I can't tell you how many buddies I know now that own that bought 3 or 4, 5, 6 wells over the last year, 2 years. And there is no workover rig count, right? And I don't know. I like being down here because you can literally see the basin and the industry evolve, honestly. Because once something, word moves fast in this town. Once you do something good or right or correct or just a successful thing, I mean, it'll rocket across the basin within months, and then you'll see it slowly start to kind of leak outside of town. So it's good. I love working here. I really do. If you're in oil and gas, I mean, this is the best place, the greatest place on earth, my opinion, to work in. I mean, small town, lots of really nice, smart people out here hustling day in and day out. So
I agree. Well, I've peppered you with plenty of questions, but there's one that I can't let you go away with.
sure.
And it's, what are some of the implications of some of the work that you're doing with Sabata, or you are part of Sabata, that we haven't seen before in industry?
That's a big question. So I think this whole like Google search model that we're doing is a very simple idea. Very simple. Now it takes a lot of work to get it out there. And what's funny is I don't know if I ever told you this, but so this was really just straight out of my doctorate, how we organize everything in the company. I actually tried to publish a paper, submitted a paper to JSR, which is a big geology thing, as a methods paper of like, this is a better way to index uh, geologic data. And I actually have the letter. It was rejected because one of the editors told me it was naive to think that this level of detail could ever be accomplished in the geologic sciences. And so fast forward 3 years later, we've built a company off of it, and we've done it. So I think what we've done is very simple, but I think, and we're already starting to see this, that when you look at oil and gas exploration data, there's very, very little transparency. There's a lot of stuff that's been out there for a long time, especially this paper stuff. Paper well logs in a lot of ways are treated almost like bearer bonds, right? Like whoever has it in their hand owns it, which is not true, but that's kind of how people treat it. And there's just these morsels of data everywhere. I mean, it's incredible. I just did a talk at Sipes this week talking about like how much we think is out there. Now we've indexed in the Permian Basin alone. We've indexed almost 1 million records. That's paper well logs, drill stem tests, you name it, anything geologic. We don't do completions or production data, right? So, but out of that 1 million, I think we've probably have indexed probably less than 25%. I think there's still probably another at least 5 million out there, not including the kind of the big data companies, but just literally sitting in boxes in someone's closet. So I think the implications for, go back to your question, why am I talking about all this? I think the implications for this is that the data transparency side of this, up until what our very simple little dashboard and product is, there was no single place to look at all of this data from multiple vendors and multiple sources in one location. There literally is none. There is one or two that do this for seismic, but not when it comes to like well logs and stuff. So we're already starting to see now with these libraries where most of these collections, they don't even actually know what they have and what their kind of their area coverage is and stuff like that. We're already seeing the transparency change between the libraries where they're starting to see where they overlap with others. And the other thing is we're having to talk about now is because when we broker this about pricing, because up until this point, each library and a lot of these private collections, they've never really worried about pricing because they never were having their stuff listed right next to somebody else's. And with transparency comes a little bit of a disruption to where now, like, okay, well, if we have the same log and this other library or this other data company has the same log, the exact same log, they're selling it at 20, we're selling it at 15. Okay, well, do we need to drop they're going to see that and they're going to drop the price. And then you end up having this resetting. We're already starting to see this where you're starting to see the prices move around now, because although there was always competition, there was no transparency. So you didn't actually know if there was something else out there. Now, when you see this and actually all on the list, we're starting to see where people are thinking about pricing structures differently for the first time in a long time, because uh, people actually can see this in a list, like have choice like you would on like Amazon. It's a really small thing. It seems really subtle and it sounds like a bit of an overstatement, but I don't think people really truly realize how much data is out there. And frankly, a lot of this is duplicate, but a lot of it actually still isn't. And I think getting that transparency and finally putting it in front of your face and actually seeing it for the first time, we're starting to see the ripple effects of that already, which is pretty exciting. I mean, this is one of the things we first started on this. Like, if we get this to work, this is going to change things, and I'm convinced we're already starting to see the effects a little bit. So as we get more and more data on here, it's like I just see that happening more and more. So anyways, I think that's the big implication for us. It's a small one, but I think data transparency in this industry, I mean, the amount of data that's in this industry is just incredible. You know, how much we use of that is a very small fraction of what's out there, to be honest. So I think that, to me, that's the big implication for us.
I agree. And thanks for sharing that. Well, those were all the questions I wanted to ask you, Bryan. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, of course. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, viewers and listeners, that's a wrap. This is the end of season 3 for PetroPapers, and Bryan was our closing act. I'm Yoga Shripadan, and I'm signing off.